The wife, whom CEO had been searching for 5 years, has a child who is actually his own son. Hi, my wonderful story family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. I want to share something from my heart. Lately, I've felt a bit down, wondering if my stories are truly connecting with you. When my last video received less comments, it made me question if I'm doing enough to bring you joy and inspiration. Every story I create comes from a place of love and passion, and your feedback means everything to me. It's what keeps me motivated and inspired to do better. If you enjoy my stories and want me to continue, please write yes in the comments. If there's anything you'd like me to improve, I truly value your suggestions. You are my story family, and your support makes this journey worthwhile. Thank you for being here. It means the world to me. Now, let's begin today's story. The crystal whiskey glass shattered against the wall, its fragments catching the warm light of their penthouse living room. Aidan Donovan stood frozen, his hand still raised, horror dawning on his face as he realized what he'd done. It wasn't like him to lose control. He was known for his composure, his calculated decision-making, the very qualities that had made him one of the youngest successful CEOs in the city. But tonight, something had snapped. Mira stood across the room, her dark eyes wide with an emotion he'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but something worse, disappointment. She'd always looked at him with love, with pride, with playful exasperation sometimes, but never like this. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself, a gesture he'd seen countless times over their 7 years together. But tonight, it wasn't against the cold. "You promised, Aidan," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silence between them. "You promised this time would be different." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of similar promises broken over the past 2 years. Promises of weekend getaways cancelled for emergency board meetings. Promises of anniversary dinners rescheduled for investor calls. Promises of starting a family postponed for 1 more quarter, 1 more year, 1 more milestone. "The company needs me, Mira," he said, running his fingers through his dark hair, a nervous habit from his college days that only surfaced when he felt cornered. "This merger could change everything. 2 more months, that's all I'm asking. Once it's done." "It's never done." Mira's voice cracked, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "There's always 1 more deal, 1 more crisis, 1 more reason why our life together has to wait. I'm 32, Aidan. We talked about having children, building a real home, not just—" She gestured at the expensive furnishings around them. "This beautiful cage." Aidan stepped toward her, but she backed away. The distance between them felt like miles, though it was only a few feet of imported marble flooring. His mind raced through their history, trying to find the right words to bridge this growing chasm. He remembered their first meeting, 5 years before their wedding. It had been at a small coffee shop where Mira worked as a barista while pursuing her art degree. He'd been a regular customer, already showing promise as a junior executive. She'd drawn elaborate designs in the foam of his lattes, tiny works of art that made him smile even on his worst days. He'd fallen in love with her creative spirit, her kindness, the way she saw beauty in the smallest things. "Remember the coffee shop?" he said softly, desperately reaching for that shared memory. "Remember how you used to tell me I worked too hard even then? But you also said that's what you loved about me, my drive, my ambition." "I loved your passion," Mira corrected him, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "There's a difference. Your passion made you light up when you talked about your dreams, but this obsession with success, it's dimming your light, Aidan. You don't smile anymore. You don't laugh. When was the last time we just sat together and talked about anything other than work?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He tried to remember, but the days and weeks blurred together in an endless cycle of meetings, phone calls, and late nights at the office. Even their recent vacation to the Maldives had been punctuated by video conferences and urgent emails. "I'm building this for us," he insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "Everything I do, every sacrifice I make, it's to give us the life we dreamed of. You grew up struggling, Mira. Your parents could barely afford your art supplies. I promised you'd never have to worry about money, about security." "I never asked for security," Mira shouted, her voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering city below. "I asked for you, for time, for love, for the chance to build a family while we're young enough to enjoy it. What good is all this success if we're too exhausted to live?" She moved to the grand piano that dominated one corner of the living room, her wedding gift to him. It had been years since he'd played. His fingers used to dance across those keys while she painted, their artistic souls in perfect harmony. Now it stood silent, collecting dust, a monument to abandoned dreams. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Mira's fingers traced the piano's smooth surface. "It's not the broken promises or the lonely nights. It's watching you turn into someone I don't recognize. The Aiden I fell in love with would never have thrown that glass. He would never have missed his own mother's birthday dinner for a business meeting." Shame burned through him at the memory of last week's missed dinner. His mother's disappointed voice on the phone still haunted him. "I'll make it up to her," he said weakly. "I'll make it up to both of you after this merger." "Stop." Mira's voice was suddenly calm, eerily so. "Just stop, Aiden. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waiting for after the merger, after the expansion, after the next big deal. Life is happening now, and we're missing it." She walked to their bedroom and he followed, a sense of dread growing in his chest. The sight of her pulling a small suitcase from their closet made his world tilt on its axis. "What are you doing?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant and frightened. "What I should have done months ago," Mira replied, methodically placing folded clothes into the suitcase. "I'm leaving." "No!" The word came out as a desperate plea. "No, Mira, please. We can fix this. I'll cut back at work. I'll delegate more. You've said all this before," she interrupted, not meeting his eyes as she continued packing. "After the Tokyo deal fell through, after you missed Christmas with my family, after every time I tried to tell you we were drifting apart, nothing changed." Panic rose in his throat as he watched her pack her essential items, the silver locket her grandmother gave her, her favorite sketchbook, the small box of watercolors he'd given her on their first anniversary. Each item disappeared into the suitcase like pieces of his heart being packed away. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't." She finally looked up at him, her eyes full of tears but her voice firm. "Don't look for me, Aiden. I need time to remember who I am without you. And you need time to decide what kind of man you want to be." He reached for her, his fingers brushing her arm. The contact sent electricity through him, memories of countless tender moments flooding his mind. Their first kiss in the rain outside the coffee shop, the way she'd smiled through tears when he proposed on a rooftop garden, their wedding dance, her head resting on his chest as they swayed to La Vie en Rose. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "Isn't that enough?" Mira stepped back from his touch, closing the suitcase with a final, devastating click. Love without presence isn't enough. Love without partnership isn't enough. Sometimes, she took a shaky breath, sometimes love isn't enough if it's not matched with action. She pulled on her coat, the camel-colored one he'd brought back from Milan, and picked up her suitcase. As she walked toward their bedroom door, she paused and slipped off her wedding ring, placing it on the nightstand beside a framed photo of their wedding day. "Goodbye, Aiden." He stood rooted to the spot as she walked away, the sound of her heels on the marble floor marking the rhythm of his world falling apart. The front door opened, then closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty penthouse. Only then did he move, rushing to the window in time to see her step into a taxi on the street below. The yellow cab merged into the late-night traffic, carrying his heart away into the darkness of the city. In the stillness that followed, Aidan noticed things he'd overlooked for too long. The empty easel in the corner where Mira used to paint, her coffee cup in the sink from that morning, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. On her pillow, he found a note written in her elegant hand. "I love you, Aidan, but I need time to heal. Don't look for me. Let me find my way back to myself. Maybe then, if fate allows, we can find our way back to each other. M." The note blurred as tears filled his eyes. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware that within one of its countless gleaming towers, a man's world had just crumbled to dust. Morning would bring panic, determination, and the beginning of a desperate search. But for now, Aidan Donovan, the man who had everything, sat alone in his perfect penthouse, surrounded by the echoes of broken promises and the deafening silence of loss. Chapter 2. Empty Spaces. Dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, painting shadows across the fragments of the shattered whiskey glass that still lay scattered on the marble floor. Aidan hadn't slept. He sat in Mira's favorite reading chair, her note crumpled in his hand, watching the city wake up with bloodshot eyes. The morning light felt wrong somehow, too bright, too ordinary for a world that had shifted so dramatically on its axis. His phone buzzed for the 100th time. Messages from his executive team about the merger, about meetings, about decisions that had seemed life-alteringly important just yesterday. Now they felt like noise, static in the deafening silence of his empty home. He picked up the phone, scrolling through his contacts until he reached Mira's name. His thumb hovered over it, trembling slightly. The call went straight to voicemail. Her voice, cheerful and light, played through the speaker. "Hi, you've reached Mira Donovan. Leave a message, and I'll call you back as soon as I can." The beep that followed felt like a knife to his chest. "Mira," he whispered, his voice rough from a night of unshed tears. Please come home. Whatever you need me to change, I'll change it. Just call me back, please." He ended the call and immediately dialed again, and again, and again. Each time her recorded voice grew more distant, more like a ghost haunting the empty spaces she'd left behind. Finally, he forced himself to stand, to move, to do something other than spiral into despair. The whiskey glass shards crunched under his expensive Italian shoes as he walked to their bedroom. No, his bedroom now. The morning sun illuminated the open closet door, and he found himself counting the empty hangers where her clothes had been. 43. She'd left exactly 43 empty hangers, their metal hooks gleaming like accusations in the morning light. Her wedding ring still sat on the nightstand where she'd left it, catching the sunlight and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Beside it, their wedding photo smiled up at him, a moment frozen in time when everything had been perfect. Mira in her white dress, looking at him like he'd hung the moon, his younger self, grinning with the absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his life making her happy. "Mr. Donovan." Maria, their housekeeper, stood in the doorway. Her eyes widened at the sight of him still in yesterday's clothes, at the obvious signs that something was terribly wrong. "Is everything okay? Mrs. Donovan's car is still in the garage, but I can't find—" "She's gone," Aidan said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She left last night." Maria crossed herself, murmuring something in Spanish. She'd been with them since they'd moved into the penthouse 3 years ago, had watched their marriage slowly fracture while maintaining a diplomatic silence. "She will come back," she said with quiet conviction. "Mrs. Mira, she loves you very much. Anyone can see it." Aidan's laugh was hollow. Love isn't enough, apparently. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair, trying to think through the fog of exhaustion and panic. I need to find her. She must have gone somewhere. Friends, family, a hotel. His mind raced through possibilities. Sarah, her best friend from art school, lived in Brooklyn. They'd had dinner with her just last month. Then there was her sister Rachel in Boston, always ready to offer Mira refuge during their previous arguments. Her parents still lived in that small town upstate where she'd grown up, in the modest house with the wild garden she'd always talked about painting someday. He pulled out his phone again, this time dialing Sarah's number. It rang 4 times before her sleepy voice answered, "Aiden, it's 7 in the morning on a Saturday. What's wrong? Is Mira with you?" The words tumbled out before he could soften them with social niceties. A pause. Number. Why would she be... Wait, what happened? She left. His voice cracked on the second word. Last night we had a fight and she just left. She's not answering her phone and I thought maybe... Oh, God. Sarah sounded fully awake now. No, she's not here. She hasn't called either. What did you do, Aiden? The accusation in her voice stung, but he couldn't deny it. What I always do. Put work first, broke promises, lost sight of what matters. He sank onto the edge of the bed, their bed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Please, if she contacts you. I'll tell her you're worried, Sarah said after a long pause. That's all I can promise. Whatever happened between you two, if Mira felt she had to leave, she must have had her reasons. The call ended, leaving Aiden with one less option and a growing sense of dread. He spent the next hour making similar calls, to Rachel, to Mira's parents, to every friend and acquaintance he could think of. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial shock, then concern, then carefully worded promises to let him know if they heard anything. By noon, he'd run out of numbers to call. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his CFO. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Merger discussion critical. Where are you? Aiden stared at the message, remembering Mira's words from last night. There's always one more deal, one more crisis. His finger hovered over the reply button before he typed, "Personal emergency." Reschedule. The response was immediate. Cannot reschedule. Japanese investors waiting. Millions at stake. Millions. The word that had driven his every decision for years now felt meaningless. What good was all that money in this empty penthouse? What was the point of success if he had no one to share it with? He walked to Mira's studio, the room he'd promised would be her sanctuary. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating half-finished paintings and scattered art supplies. On her easel sat an unfinished piece, a couple dancing in the rain, their figures blurred and intimate. With a start, he recognized himself and Mira, captured in the moment of their first kiss outside that coffee shop. The painting was still wet in places, evidence that she'd been working on it recently. Had she been trying to remind herself of their beginning while their present crumbled? Or was it a goodbye gift, a final memory preserved in oils and canvas? His phone buzzed again. The CFO. Investors getting impatient, legal team standing by. Aiden looked at the painting, then at his phone, then at the empty spaces all around him. For the first time in his career, he turned off his phone completely. Moving with sudden purpose, he went to his home office. The computer hummed to life, and he opened a browser searching for private investigators in New York City. The top result was a firm called Davidson & Associates, specializing in missing persons cases. Their website promised discretion and results, with a 90% success rate. The phone number glowed on his screen like a beacon of hope. He picked up his office phone, dialing with trembling fingers. Davidson & Associates, a professional voice answered. My name is Aiden Donovan, he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. My wife left last night, and I need to find her. Mr. Donovan, I should inform you that if your wife left voluntarily— I know she left voluntarily, Aidan interrupted. I know she doesn't want to be found. But I need— He took a deep breath, looking at their wedding photo on his desk. I need to know she's safe. I need to make things right. There was a pause on the other end. Come to our office, bring recent photos and any information you have about her habits, friends, possible destinations. We'll do what we can. Aidan wrote down the address, a spark of hope flickering in his chest. As he stood to leave, his eye caught something tucked behind their wedding photo. A small sketch Mira had done of him years ago, when he still made time to sit still long enough for her to draw him. On the back, in her flowing handwriting, was a quote, "Love is not about possession. It's about appreciation." He carefully folded the sketch and put it in his wallet, a reminder of what he was really searching for, not just Mira, but the man she'd fallen in love with, the man he needed to become again. The merger documents sat unsigned on his desk, the deadline ticking away. For the first time in years, Aidan walked past them without a second glance. In the elevator down to the garage, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls, designer suit wrinkled from the sleepless night, dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed. He barely recognized himself. "I'll find you," he whispered to the empty air, a promise to Mira and to himself. "And this time, I'll be worthy of you." The garage was quiet except for the echo of his footsteps. Mira's car sat in its usual spot, a silver Audi he'd bought her last Christmas. She'd taken a taxi instead, he realized, leaving behind every luxury he'd surrounded her with. It was never about the money, the cars, the penthouse. It had always been about time, presence, love, the things he'd forgotten how to give. As he drove through the city streets toward the detective agency, memories of Mira played through his mind like a film reel. Her laugh echoing through their first apartment, so much smaller but somehow warmer than the penthouse. The way she'd dance while cooking breakfast, singing off-key to old jazz songs. The proud smile on her face when she sold her first painting, and how he'd missed the gallery opening because of a late meeting. The city passed by in a blur of glass and steel, thousands of windows hiding thousands of stories. Behind one of them, somewhere, was Mira. The thought of her alone, hurting, possibly crying, made his chest ache. But another thought hurt even more, the possibility that she wasn't crying at all, that she felt relieved, freed from the golden cage he'd built around their life. The detective agency's office building loomed, ahead, solid and professional. As Aidan parked his car, his phone lay silent and dark in his pocket, the merger forgotten, the millions in deals suspended in limbo. For the first time in years, he had only one priority, one goal that mattered. The empty spaces Mira left behind echoed with possibilities of redemption, of change, of a love strong enough to survive its own undoing. As Aidan stepped into the detective agency's lobby, he carried those empty spaces with him, each one a reminder of what he'd lost and what he had to find, not just his wife, but himself. Chapter 3. The first year time moved strangely in Mira's absence. Days stretched like taffy, endless when Aidan lay awake at night studying investigation reports, yet vanishing in breathless chunks as leads went cold. The seasons changed outside his office window, summer fading to autumn, then winter, then spring, marking the first year of his search with nature's indifferent clockwork. "Mr. Donovan?" His assistant Rebecca's voice crackled through the intercom. "The investigators are here with their monthly report." Aidan straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie. Another habit from better days, when Mira would straighten it for him each morning with a playful smile. "Send them in." James Davidson entered with his usual measured steps, a thick folder tucked under his arm. After a year of these meetings, the private investigator's face had become as familiar as his own reflection, though considerably more welcome. Behind him walked Anna Chen, his best researcher, her tablet already open to their latest findings. "Tell me you have something," Aidan said, not bothering with pleasantries. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, testament to another sleepless night spent poring over bank records and travel manifests. Davidson placed the folder on Aidan's desk with careful precision. "We've confirmed she crossed state lines. A hotel clerk in Pennsylvania remembered her. She stayed one night, paid cash, used her middle name, Elizabeth." Aidan's heart jumped. Elizabeth, her grandmother's name. She'd always said she'd name their daughter Elizabeth if they had one. When? 3 days after she left. Anna swiped through documents on her tablet. She was alone, carrying a small suitcase. The clerk remembered because she looked. She hesitated. "Tell me." She was crying when she checked in, said she needed a quiet room, somewhere she could think. The image of Mira alone in a sterile hotel room, crying, made Aidan's chest constrict. He stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, his wife was building a new life without him. The thought haunted his days and poisoned his nights. "We also found this." Davidson opened the folder, revealing a grainy security camera photo. "Bus station in Pittsburgh, 2 weeks after the hotel sighting. The quality isn't great, but—" "It's her." Aidan's voice was hoarse. Even in the blurry image, he'd know her anywhere. The way she held herself, one hand clutching her bag strap, the other, his breath caught. The other pressed against her stomach in a gesture he'd seen countless times when she felt nervous or ill. "She bought a ticket west," Anna continued, her voice gentle. "But we lost her after that. She could have changed buses, doubled back. She's being careful, Mr. Donovan. Very careful." Of course she was. Mira had always been clever, detail-oriented in a way that balanced his broad strokes approach to life. How many times had she saved him from overlooking crucial details in contracts, in meetings, in life? Now she was using that same meticulous nature to stay hidden from him. His office door opened without a knock, something only one person dared to do anymore. Thomas Wells, his CFO and oldest friend, strode in with a stack of papers and a thunderous expression. "Aidan, we need to talk about the Singapore deal. The board is—" He stopped short, taking in the investigators and the scattered photos. His face softened slightly. "Still nothing?" "She's heading west," Aidan said, turning back to the window. "Or was. A year ago." Thomas exchanged glances with Davidson and Anna. "Give us the room, please." The investigators gathered their materials quietly, leaving behind only the photo from the bus station. When the door clicked shut, Thomas dropped the papers on Aidan's desk with a heavy sigh. "The board is calling for a vote of no confidence." Aidan barely reacted. The words seemed to come from far away, as meaningless as the stock reports he'd stopped reading months ago. "Let them vote." "Damn it, Aidan!" Thomas slammed his hand on the desk. "This isn't just about you anymore. We have 10,000 employees depending on this company. The Singapore expansion could save our Asian market share, but you've missed 3 crucial meetings. The numbers are falling, investors are nervous, and you're chasing ghosts." "She's not a ghost." Aidan picked up the bus station photo, his finger tracing Mira's blurry outline. "She's out there, Thomas, maybe sick, definitely alone, and it's my fault. The company, the deals, the money, none of it matters if I can't make this right." Thomas ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every day of his 50 years. "Remember what you told me when we started this company? No half measures. You were 25, brilliant, unstoppable. That drive, that focus, it built all this." He gestured at the office, the city beyond. "But now you're giving half measures to everything. Half to the search, half to the company, and both are suffering." The words hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. Aidan sank into his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. On his desk, amid acquisition reports and profit projections, sat Mira's last note, worn thin from constant handling. The words had faded, but he knew them by heart. "I love you, Aiden, but I need time to heal." "What would you have me do?" he asked quietly. "Forget her. Move on. Act like the last 8 years of my life didn't happen." Thomas's voice softened. "Number. But maybe it's time to let the professionals handle the search. Come back to the company. Save what you've built. Be ready for her if she comes back." If. Aiden's laugh was bitter. That's what everyone's starting to say now. If she comes back. If she wants to be found. If she still loves me. He stood again, restless energy driving him to pace. "You want to know the truth, Thomas. I don't care about the company anymore. Let it fall. Let all of it fall. Every dollar I've earned, every deal I've closed. I'd trade it all just to know she's okay." "You don't mean that." "I do." Aiden stopped pacing, suddenly still. "That's what scares me. I finally understand what Mira meant about the price of success. I won that merger fight the night she left. Did you know that? While she was packing her bags, I was closing a $100 million deal. I thought I was securing our future, but I was losing it with every phone call, every late meeting, every missed dinner." He walked to the credenza where he kept their wedding photo, the one piece of their life together he'd brought to the office. "The board wants to vote? Let them. I'll step down if that's what they want, but I'm not stopping the search. Not ever." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying his friend with a mixture of concern and resignation. Finally he said, "Give me 6 months. Let me handle the Singapore deal, restructure the leadership. You focus on finding her, but don't lose everything else in the process. Please." Aiden looked at his friend, really looked at him for the first time in months. Thomas had been there from the beginning, believing in him when no one else would. He'd been best man at the wedding, had watched Aiden and Mira's love story unfold, had warned him countless times about working too hard. 6 months, Aiden agreed finally. "But I need something from you too. Name it. Access to the company's resources, private jets, contacts, databases, everything we have. If she's out there building a new life, she'll need work, an apartment, utilities. I want our systems scanning for her name, her social security number, any trace she might leave." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll set it up. But Aiden, what if she doesn't want to be found?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Aiden turned back to the window, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, Mira's favorite colors to paint with. "Then I'll respect her choice," he said softly. "But first, I have to know she's safe. I have to tell her I understand now, what I lost, what I threw away. Even if she never comes back, she deserves to know that she changed me, that she saved me from becoming someone I never wanted to be." As if in response to his words, his phone buzzed with a text from Davidson. "New lead! Hospital records in Ohio. Name matches. Urgent." Aiden's heart raced as he grabbed his coat. The sun had almost set, painting long shadows across his office floor. Another day ending, another night beginning, in this endless year of searching. But something felt different this time. The hospital records meant she might be sick, might need help. For the first time in months, he had a direction, a purpose beyond blind searching. "Where are you going?" Thomas called after him. "The board meeting is in an hour." Aiden didn't stop, didn't look back. "Tell them I resign as CEO. The company's yours, Thomas. Do what you have to do." The elevator doors closed on his old life, the sound like a final punctuation mark. In his pocket, the bus station photo crinkled as he pulled out his phone to book a flight to Ohio. The image of Mira's hand pressed against her stomach haunted him. Something about that gesture nagged at his memory, trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to understand. As his car sped through the darkening city streets toward the airport, Aidan finally felt the walls he'd built around his heart. Walls made of ambition, pride, and misplaced priorities, beginning to crumble. The first year of searching had stripped away everything he thought he wanted, leaving only what he truly needed, a chance to make things right, to be worthy of the love he'd taken for granted. The city lights blurred behind him, each one a star in the constellation of his past life. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also hope. Somewhere in Ohio, a hospital record held answers, and maybe, just maybe, those answers would lead him back to Mira. Chapter 4. Echoes. The morning sickness hit Mira like a tidal wave as she cleaned tables at the small diner in Columbus, Ohio. She barely made it to the employee bathroom, her trembling hands gripping the sink as her world tilted sideways. In the streaked mirror, her reflection told the story of 3 months on the run, thinner face, darker circles under her eyes, and now this unmistakable pallor that came with early pregnancy. "You okay in there, Elizabeth?" Janet, the motherly head waitress, called through the door. Mira had been using her middle name since leaving New York, shedding Mira Donovan like an old skin. "You've been getting sick every morning this week." Mira splashed cold water on her face, trying to steady herself. "I'm fine," she called back, the lie bitter on her tongue. She wasn't fine. She was pregnant with Aidan's child, alone in a city where no one knew her real name, working for minimum wage plus tips. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left because Aidan kept postponing their plans for a family, and now here she was, carrying their child without him. The pregnancy test had confirmed her suspicions 2 weeks ago, though she'd known in her heart since that night at the bus station in Pittsburgh. The way her body felt different, the sudden aversions to smells, the tears that came too easily. Their last night together had given her more than just painful memories. Janet was waiting outside the bathroom, concern etched on her weathered face. "Honey, I raised 4 kids. I know morning sickness when I see it." Mira's hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach. She hadn't told anyone yet, as if speaking it aloud would make it more real, more terrifying. But Janet's knowing look broke something inside her, and the tears came unbidden. "Oh, sweetheart." Janet pulled her into a tight hug, smelling of coffee and maternal warmth. "Does the father know?" Mira shook her head against Janet's shoulder. The father, Aidan. He was probably still in their penthouse, buried in work, maybe not even noticing she was gone. Or worse, he was looking for her, his resources and determination making it harder to stay hidden with each passing day. It's complicated," Mira managed, pulling away to wipe her eyes. "I can't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Janet studied her face for a long moment. "You're running from something or someone. I figured that much when you showed up looking like a scared rabbit. But a baby changes things, Elizabeth. You need support, medical care, stability." The morning rush bell rang, saving Mira from having to respond. She straightened her apron, checking that her name tag, Elizabeth, was straight. "I should get back to work." "Take table 6, Janet said softly. "The tips are better, and you're eating for 2 now." The diner buzzed with its usual morning energy, truckers getting coffee before long hauls, office workers grabbing quick breakfasts, regulars who came in daily for Janet's famous pancakes. Mira moved between tables automatically, her mind elsewhere. She thought of the small room she rented above Mrs. Chen's grocery store, with its narrow bed and shared bathroom. It was a far cry from the penthouse, but it was safe, anonymous. Mrs. Chen asked no questions when Mira paid in cash, only insisted on feeding her extra portions of dumplings, as if sensing she needed caring for. Between tables, Mira caught glimpses of the TV mounted above the counter. CNBC was running a story about Donovan Enterprises, something about leadership changes and stock prices falling. Her heart stopped when Aidan's face appeared on screen, then restarted with painful force. He looked thinner, tired, his usual confident smile replaced by something haunted. The caption read, "CEO steps down amid company crisis." "You know him?" Janet's voice made her jump. She'd been staring at the screen, coffee pot frozen mid-pour. "No," Mira said quickly, too quickly. "He just reminds me of someone I used to know." The lie felt like betrayal, but what could she say? That the man on screen was her husband, the father of her unborn child. That she still loved him so much it physically hurt, but she couldn't go back. That every night she dreamed of their last argument, of the shattered glass, of the moment she realized their marriage had become as hollow as their beautiful home. Her hand trembled as she set down the coffee pot. The morning sickness was passing, but a different kind of nausea remained. Aidan had stepped down as CEO, the position he'd sacrificed everything for, including their marriage. What did that mean? Was he looking for her? The thought sent panic through her veins. During her break, Mira sat in the back alley, one hand resting on her stomach, while the other held her latest ultrasound picture. The baby was barely visible, just a tiny flutter of life, but the sight of it brought tears to her eyes. This child would have Aidan's determination, his brilliant mind, his kind heart, hidden beneath layers of ambition. But would they ever know their father? "Got room for one more?" Janet appeared with 2 cups of chamomile tea, settling beside her on the milk crate they used as a break chair. "Helps with the nausea." Mira quickly tucked the ultrasound into her apron pocket, but not before Janet caught a glimpse. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tea. The warm cup felt steadying in her hands. "You know," Janet said carefully, blowing on her own tea, "my oldest, Sophie, she came along when I was younger than you. Her father was, well, let's say complicated. I thought I had to do it all alone. Proud and scared and stubborn as hell." Mira stared into her tea, seeing memories ripple across its surface. What happened? Life happened. Sophie happened. And I learned that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people help you. A siren wailed in the distance, the sound echoing off the alley walls. Mira thought of all the people who would help her if she let them, her parents, her sister Rachel, her best friend Sarah. But reaching out to any of them meant risking Aidan finding her. And if he found her now, with their child growing inside her? "I can't go back," she whispered, more to herself than to Janet. "He'll try to fix everything with money, with promises, with grand gestures. But he won't fix himself. And I can't raise this baby in a home filled with broken promises and empty spaces where love should be." Janet was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea. Finally, she said, "My sister runs a women's shelter in Cleveland. They have programs for expectant mothers, job training, counseling. You wouldn't have to give them your real name, just think about it." Mira nodded, tears blurring her vision again. Damn pregnancy hormones, making every kind word feel like a lifeline in a storm. "I'll think about it." The back door opened, and Tommy, the short-order cook, stuck his head out. "Bus just arrived. Getting slammed in here?" Mira stood, smoothing her apron and wiping her eyes. The ultrasound photo crinkled in her pocket, a secret rhythm against her hip as she walked. In the bathroom, she splashed more cold water on her face and stared hard at her reflection. "We'll be okay," she whispered to her stomach, to the tiny life that had changed everything. "Mommy will figure this out." The diner was chaos when she returned. Every table full, orders flying, the clatter of plates and voices creating a symphony of ordinary life. Mira moved through it all like a ghost, taking orders, delivering plates, smiling her practiced smile. But her mind was elsewhere, spinning future scenarios like the watercolor dreams she used to paint. She imagined a small apartment with a nursery, walls covered in the art she hadn't touched since leaving New York. She saw herself reading stories to a dark-haired child with Aiden's blue eyes, teaching them to paint, to see beauty in small things. But in every imagined scene, there was a space where Aiden should be, an absence that felt like a physical ache. Near the end of her shift, she noticed a man in a suit asking questions at the counter, showing a photo to Tommy. Her heart nearly stopped until she realized it wasn't one of Aiden's investigators, just a process server looking for someone else. Still, the fear that gripped her was real enough. That night, in her tiny room above the grocery store, Mira made lists in her battered notebook, pros and cons of Janet's sister's shelter, cities further west where she might disappear again, names for the baby, only girls' names, because thinking about boy names that weren't Aiden felt impossible. The TV in Mrs. Chen's apartment below carried echoes of the business news. Aiden's name floated up through the thin floors, making her chest tight. She turned on her small radio to drown it out, finding an old jazz station. La Vie en Rose played softly, their wedding song. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Mira curled up on her narrow bed, one hand protectively over her stomach, the other clutching her notebook. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent to her tears. Somewhere in that vast network of streets and lives, Aiden was looking for her. And for the first time since leaving, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to stop. "Your daddy loves deeply," she whispered to her unborn child. "Too deeply sometimes, so deeply he forgets to love himself, to love life outside of winning and succeeding. But he would love you. God, how he would love you." The jazz station played on, filling her small room with memories of better days. Mira fell asleep with tear tracks on her cheeks, dreaming of shattered glasses and wedding rings, of ultrasound pictures and tiny hands reaching for a father they might never know. In her dreams, Aiden found her, held her, promised to be better. In her dreams, love was enough. But morning would come, bringing with it more decisions, more fears, more hopes. The child inside her grew stronger each day, a beacon of light in her uncertain world. And somewhere between the life she'd left and the life she was building, Mira Donovan, now Elizabeth Chen, waitress and mother-to-be, searched for her own kind of healing. Chapter 5. Changes. The Ohio hospital lead had been another dead end. Aiden sat in his hotel room, staring at the wall of evidence he'd created. Photos, timelines, possible sightings, all connected with red string like a detective's murder board. Except he wasn't tracking a crime. He was tracking the pieces of his broken heart. The hospital records had belonged to another Elizabeth Donovan, no relation, just another false hope in a year full of them. But something about this trip felt different. Maybe it was the diner where he'd stopped for coffee this morning, watching the waitresses move between tables with practiced grace. Any one of them could have been Mira, starting over, building a new life. The thought haunted him. His phone buzzed. Thomas, probably with more news about the company. Instead, he found a message from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Donovan, this is Clara Martinez. The shelter director? We met last week during your visit. Could we meet? There's something you should know." Aiden's pulse quickened. The women's shelter in Cleveland had been a long shot, but he'd started visiting such places, donating money, learning about why women left and what they needed to start over. If he was going to find Mira, he needed to understand. An hour later, he sat in Clara's modest office, the walls covered with resources for women in crisis. Clara herself was a striking woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded him of his mother. "Thank you for coming," she said, pouring him tea from a chipped pottery mug. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about your wife. You said something that stuck with me, that you didn't just want to find her, but to understand her." Aiden wrapped his hands around the warm mug, remembering how Mira used to make tea every evening, trying to coax him away from his laptop. "I was blind," he said quietly. "I thought providing for her meant giving her things. I never understood that what she needed was me, just me, present and aware." Clara nodded, studying him over her own mug. "Many women who come here aren't running from physical abuse. They're running from emotional absence, from lives where they've become ghosts in their own homes. Your donation will help us support them, but—" she hesitated. But I think you could do more. The shelter needs board members, people who understand both business and the human side of what we do. Someone who's lived through this from the other perspective." Aidan stared at her, surprised. "You want me on your board, but I'm the one who drove my wife away. I'm the cautionary tale." Clara's laugh was unexpected and warm. "You're also the first man I've met who spent a year trying to understand why she left, instead of just trying to get her back. That kind of insight, combined with your business experience, we could help a lot of women rebuild their lives." The idea took root in Aidan's mind, growing alongside memories of Mira's last words to him. "You need time to decide what kind of man you want to be." "I'll do it," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "But I want to be involved, not just a name on letterhead. I want to learn, to help where I can." Clara's smile was approving. "Good, because we have a new program starting, job training and small business loans for women starting over. They need mentors, people who understand both the business world and the importance of work-life balance." For the first time in months, Aidan felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose beyond his search for Mira. "Tell me more." Over the next few hours, Clara shared stories of women who'd rebuilt their lives, of children who'd found stability, of families reunited after both partners had grown and healed. Each story was a mirror, reflecting different aspects of his own journey. As he left the shelter, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Davidson, his investigator. Possible lead in Cleveland. Hospital records show an Elizabeth Chen admitted for prenatal care 3 months ago. Description matches. Aidan stopped walking, the world tilting beneath his feet. Prenatal care. The words echoed in his head as memories rushed back. Mira's hand on her stomach in the bus station photo, her recent push to start a family, the timing of her departure. "Send me everything," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "And Davidson? Handle this carefully. If it's her, if she's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Back in his hotel room, Aidan added the new information to his wall. Elizabeth Chen. The name blurred as tears filled his eyes. If Mira was pregnant with his child, if she'd been alone all this time, the thought was unbearable. He sank onto the bed, pulling out his wallet where he kept the small sketch she'd done of him. On the back, her words seemed to take on new meaning. "Love is not about possession, it's about appreciation." His phone rang. Thomas again. This time he answered. "The board approved the restructuring," Thomas said without preamble. "The company's stable. You can come back whenever you're ready." Aidan looked at his evidence wall, at Clara's shelter business card, at the possible proof that somewhere out there Mira might be carrying their child. "I'm not coming back, Thomas, not to run things. The company's yours now. You've earned it. I need to become someone different." There was a long pause. The great Aidan Donovan, stepping away from the empire he built. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I, but I'm not that man anymore. I can't be." After hanging up, Aidan made another call to his real estate agent. "List the penthouse," he said firmly, "and find me something smaller, something—" He thought of Mira's dream of a real home. Something with a garden, maybe, and a room that would work as a nursery. The agent's surprise was audible. "A nursery? But sir, I thought—" Just find it and donate everything in the penthouse except her art supplies and the piano. Those go into storage. That night, Aidan drove to the shelter again, this time for their evening support group. He sat in the back, listening as women shared their stories of leaving, of starting over, of finding themselves again. Each story taught him something about Mira, about himself, about the complexity of love and healing. One woman spoke about hiding her pregnancy from her ex, afraid he'd use the child to control her. Aidan's heart clenched, thinking of Mira possibly carrying their baby alone, afraid he'd try to buy her back with promises and security. After the meeting, Clara found him still sitting there, lost in thought. "Heavy stuff, isn't it?" she asked gently. "If she's pregnant," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "If she's out there having our baby alone because she thinks I'll try to control her. How do I fix that? How do I prove I've changed when I can't even tell her?" Clara sat beside him, her presence comforting in its steadiness. "You're already fixing it. Every woman in that room tonight felt heard, understood. The man your wife left wouldn't have sat through their stories. He wouldn't have cared about their healing." "I think about her every minute," Aidan admitted, "but lately I think more about her happiness than my need to find her. I want her to know she was right, about me, about us, about everything, that her leaving, it broke me, but it also saved me." "Then show her," Clara said simply. "Not by finding her, but by becoming the man she knew you could be, the kind of man who helps others heal while healing himself." Later, in his hotel room, Aidan took down his evidence wall. The photos, the timelines, the red strings, they felt wrong now, like an obsession rather than a path to redemption. He kept only two things: the bus station photo showing Mira's protective gesture and her note asking for time to heal. He opened his laptop, beginning a different kind of search. Information about pregnancy, about supporting single mothers, about creating safe spaces for women rebuilding their lives. If Mira was out there carrying their child, he would make sure there were resources for women like her in every city she might be in. The night deepened outside his window as Aidan worked, not on business deals or mergers, but on proposals for shelter programs, for job training initiatives, for childcare support. With each proposal, he imagined Mira finding her way to these resources, feeling supported, even if she never knew they came from him. "I'm changing," he whispered to her photo. "I'm learning. And whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be the man you always saw in me, the man our child deserves as a father." Dawn found him still working, but with a new purpose. The mighty CEO was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood that true strength lay not in controlling life, but in nurturing it. Outside his window, Cleveland was waking up, its streets filling with people starting their days. Somewhere in this city, or another one just like it, Mira might be waking too, their child growing beneath her heart. The thought no longer filled him with desperate panic, but with a quiet determination to become worthy of them both. The rising sun painted the city in shades of hope, and for the first time since Mira left, Aidan felt truly awake. Chapter 6. New Life. The contractions started during Mira's evening shift at the diner. She'd been fighting them all day, determined to finish her last week of work before the baby came. But as she carried plates of meatloaf to table 4, a pain ripped through her that made the world go white around the edges. "That's it," Janet announced, appearing at her side to steady the teetering plates. "Tommy, call an ambulance. This baby's coming whether Elizabeth likes it or not." Mira wanted to protest, to finish her shift, to maintain the careful control she'd built over the past 8 months, but her body had other plans. She gripped the edge of the counter, breathing through another contraction. "It's too early," she whispered. "2 more weeks. Babies come when they come, honey." Janet's voice was firm but gentle as she guided Mira to a chair. "Mrs. Chen is already on her way with your hospital bag. Did you call your sister?" Mira shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. She hadn't called anyone, not Rachel, not her parents, not Sarah. Every phone call was a risk, a chance for Aiden to find her. Even now, with their child about to enter the world, the fear of being found warred with her desperate wish not to be alone. The ambulance arrived quickly, its lights painting the diner's windows in rotating red. As the paramedics helped her onto the stretcher, Mira caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Pale face, dark hair escaping its bun, both hands cradling her swollen belly. For a moment she saw herself as Aiden might see her, if he were here. Would he be proud? Angry? Would he understand why she'd kept this miracle from him? "I'm coming with you," Janet declared, climbing into the ambulance before anyone could object. She'd become a surrogate mother to Mira over the past months, sharing pregnancy advice, bringing her homemade soup, quietly slipping extra money into her tips. Now she held Mira's hand through each contraction, murmuring encouragement as they raced through the night. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and concerned faces. Dr. Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter and Mira's obstetrician, met them in the delivery room. She'd been caring for Mira pro bono, another kindness in a long chain of mercies that had kept her afloat. "The baby's in distress," Dr. Chen announced after checking the monitors. "Heart rates dropping with each contraction. We need to do an emergency C-section." Fear gripped Mira's heart. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. In her dreams, when she'd allowed herself to imagine this moment, Aiden was there, holding her hand, his blue eyes bright with tears of joy. Instead, she was surrounded by kind strangers, about to bring their child into the world under a borrowed name. "Janet!" she gasped between contractions. "In my bag! There's a letter. If anything happens to me, it explains everything. Make sure—" Another contraction cut off her words. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Janet said firmly, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the request. "I'll make sure the letter gets where it needs to go, but you're going to be fine. You're the strongest person I know, Elizabeth. Or whatever your real name is." Mira managed a weak smile before they wheeled her into surgery. The operating room was cold, the lights harsh. As they prepared her for the C-section, she thought of Aiden. Would their child have his eyes, his determination, his kind heart beneath the ambitious exterior? "Ready?" Dr. Chen asked from behind her surgical mask. "On the count of 3. The procedure was quick, but felt eternal. Mira lay there, hands trembling, listening to the medical team's quiet communications. Then, suddenly, a cry pierced the air, strong, indignant, alive. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Mira's face as they lifted him over the surgical drape. He was perfect, tiny features scrunched in protest, dark hair matted to his head, and when he opened his eyes, Aiden's eyes looked back at her, startlingly blue and alert. "Noah," she whispered, the name she'd chosen months ago but never spoken aloud. Noah Alexander. Alexander had been Aiden's father's name, a piece of heritage she could give their son, even if he never knew his father. The next few hours passed in a haze of recovery and first moments. Noah proved to be a natural at nursing, his tiny hand gripping her finger as he fed. Janet and Mrs. Chen took turns sitting with her, making sure she was never alone. Late that night, when the hospital had quieted, and Noah slept peacefully in his clear bassinet beside her bed, Mira finally allowed herself to cry. They weren't tears of pain or fear, but of overwhelming love and bittersweet joy. Her son, their son, was here, and he was perfect. She reached for her phone, fingers hovering over Aiden's number, still memorized despite months of silence. How many times had she almost called him during the pregnancy? When she first felt Noah kick, when she learned he was a boy, when she saw his face on the ultrasound. But each time, fear had stopped her. Not fear of Aidan himself, but fear of losing this fragile independence she'd built. Fear of Noah becoming a bargaining chip in their broken relationship. A nurse brought her a form to fill out, Noah's birth certificate. She stared at the blank space for father's name, her heart heavy with the weight of choices made and paths not taken. In the end, she wrote, unknown. Each letter a small betrayal that she prayed Noah would someday understand. The next morning brought visitors. Janet with homemade muffins, Mrs. Chen with a red egg for luck, diner regulars who'd watched her pregnancy progress and felt invested in this new life. They cooed over Noah, praising his perfect fingers and toes, diplomatically not mentioning how his eyes were nothing like Elizabeth's brown ones. Dr. Chen came by for a final check, closing the door for privacy. The birth certificate's been filed, she said gently, but it's not too late to amend it if you want to add the father's name. Mira looked down at Noah, peaceful in her arms. His father, he's a good man, she said softly. Driven, brilliant, capable of so much love, but he lost himself in ambition, in the need to build something great. I couldn't let Noah grow up thinking that's what love looks like. Presence instead of presence, success instead of connection. Dr. Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes. And now? People can change, Elizabeth, or whatever your name is. Mira, she whispered, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. My name is Mira. Mira, Dr. Chen repeated, smiling. It suits you better than Elizabeth. You know, I've seen the shelter programs your husband started. Mira's head snapped up. What? It's been in the news. Aidan Donovan, stepping down as CEO to focus on women's shelters and family support programs. My colleague Clara Martinez says he's transformed their Cleveland shelter, created job training programs, childcare support. She trailed off, noting Mira's pale face. I thought you might have heard. Mira's world tilted on its axis. Aidan, walking away from the company he'd built, working with women's shelters. It seemed impossible, yet, wasn't this what she'd hoped for? That her leaving would wake him up, help him find his way back to the man she'd fallen in love with? Noah stirred in her arms, making tiny, snuffling noises that already felt like the music of her heart. She traced his perfect features, Aidan's nose, her chin, their shared future wrapped in hospital flannel. He's really changed, she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Chen pulled out her phone, bringing up a news article. There was Aidan, photographed at a shelter opening. He looked different, thinner, somehow softer around the edges. His eyes held a sadness she'd never seen before, but also a warmth that reminded her of their early days. The article says he was inspired by his wife's departure to reevaluate his priorities, Dr. Chen said carefully. He's created a foundation for supporting women in transition, especially expectant mothers. Mira's vision blurred with tears. All these months, she'd imagined him angry, resentful, throwing himself deeper into work to forget her. Instead, he'd been learning, growing, becoming the man she'd always known he could be. Noah chose that moment to wake fully, his blue eyes, Aidan's eyes, blinking up at her. He needed changing, then feeding, then burping. The constant demands of new motherhood pushed the revelation about Aidan to the background, but couldn't erase it completely. That night, alone in her hospital room with Noah sleeping beside her, Mira made a decision. She reached for her phone again, but instead of calling Aidan, she called the number listed in the article for his foundation. Women's New Beginnings Foundation. How can we help you? A kind voice answered. Mira's throat tightened. I just had a baby. I'm alone. Starting over. I need help. You've called the right place, the voice assured her. We have programs for mothers just like you. Can you tell me where you are? As Mira gave her location, still using the name Elizabeth Chen, she wondered if this information would make its way to Aidan. Part of her hoped it would. Part of her was still afraid. But looking at Noah, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep, she knew she couldn't keep him from his father forever. Not if Aidan had truly changed. Not if he'd become the kind of man who built shelters instead of empires. "One day," she whispered to her sleeping son, "you'll know the whole story. How much I loved your father, how much it hurt to leave, how his love for success became a wall between us. But maybe you'll also know how he tore that wall down, brick by brick, to become someone new. Maybe ... She left the thought unfinished, but for the first time since leaving New York, she fell asleep, with hope blooming in her heart. Noah slept beside her, his perfect face illuminated by moonlight, while somewhere in Cleveland, his father built safe spaces for women like her, never knowing that his own son had just been born under the shelter of his transformed love. Chapter 7. The Middle Years. 3 years into his search for Mira, Aidan stood at the podium of his newest women's shelter in Columbus, Ohio. The renovated building gleamed behind him, its fresh paint and welcoming facade a far cry from the abandoned warehouse it had been 6 months ago. As he looked out at the crowd gathered for the opening ceremony, he felt a familiar mix of pride and melancholy. Pride in what he'd built. Melancholy that Mira wasn't here to see how he'd changed. "The New Beginnings Foundation isn't just about providing shelter," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the attentive audience. "It's about giving women the tools to rebuild their lives on their own terms. Every woman who walks through these doors will find not just safety, but opportunity, job training, childcare, counseling, and most importantly, the freedom to choose their own path forward." In the front row, Clara Martinez nodded approvingly. She'd become not just his mentor in this work, but a true friend. Beside her sat Thomas, who'd flown in from New York to support the opening. The company was thriving under his leadership, proving what Mira had known all along, that Aidan's obsession with control had been unnecessary, driven by fear rather than necessity. After the ceremony, as donors and community leaders mingled over coffee and pastries, Clara pulled him aside. "There's something you should know," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "We received an intake call last night from a woman named Elizabeth Chen. She'd just given birth, alone, needed support." Aidan's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. Elizabeth Chen, the name from the hospital records he'd found months ago. "Where?" he demanded, then forced himself to soften his tone. "Where is she?" "Aidan," Clara's voice held a warning. "If this is Mira, if she's just had your child, rushing in now could destroy any chance of reconciliation. She reached out for help, not to be found." The truth of Clara's words hit him like a physical blow. He sank into a nearby chair, running his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded him painfully of Mira, of how she used to tease him about it being his tell when he was stressed. "A baby," he whispered, "my baby." And she was alone. "Not alone," Clara corrected gently. "The intake notes mention a support network, a diner owner, a landlady, medical professionals who helped her pro bono. She's built a community, Aidan. Respect that." "What do I do?" The question came out raw, honest. "How do I protect them without controlling them? How do I love them without crushing them?" Clara sat beside him, her presence steady and grounding. "You're already doing it. Every shelter you open, every program you fund, you're creating safe spaces where Mira and your child can thrive, whether they're ready to know you or not." Later that evening, Aidan walked through the quiet shelter, imagining Mira and their child in each room, in the nursery with its cheerful murals, in the job training center with its state-of-the-art computers, in the art therapy room he'd insisted on including in every shelter because he knew how much Mira loved to paint. His phone buzzed. Davidson, his investigator, who now focused more on ensuring Mira's safety from a distance than on finding her. "Sir, the birth certificate was filed. It's a boy." Aidan had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. A son. He had a son. "Name?" he managed to ask. "Noah Alexander Chen." Alexander, his father's name. Even in hiding, even keeping their son from him, Mira had given their boy a piece of his heritage. The gesture broke something open in Aidan's chest, releasing tears he hadn't known he was holding back. The next morning, against every instinct screaming at him to rush to the hospital, Aidan instead called an emergency meeting of his foundation's board. "I want to expand our new mother support program," he announced. "Full medical care, housing assistance, job placement, whatever they need, for as long as they need it." "That's a significant investment," Thomas observed from his seat at the table. "The foundation's doing well, but—" "Use my personal funds," Aidan interrupted. "Sell the penthouse, liquidate my investments, all of it." The board members exchanged glances. Clara, however, smiled knowingly. "I'll draft the proposal," she said. "And Aidan, I think it's time you met someone." That afternoon, Clara introduced him to Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who'd rebuilt her life through one of his shelters. She sat across from him in his office, her 2-year-old daughter coloring quietly beside her. "When I left my husband," Sarah began, "I thought I was protecting my daughter from growing up thinking love meant control. But looking back, I wish—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I wish I'd given him the chance to prove he could change. By the time I realized he had, it was too late. We'd both moved on." Aidan watched her daughter scribble with determined concentration, her tiny face so serious about her art, just like Mira when she painted. "What would you have done differently?" he asked softly. "I would have left a door open," Sarah said. "Some way for him to show me his change was real, not just words and promises." She smiled sadly. "Instead, I disappeared completely, made it impossible for him to prove anything." The parallels weren't lost on Aidan. That evening, he added a new element to all his foundation's programs, a secure way for separated families to communicate when both parties were ready. No pressure, no obligations, just an open door. As summer faded into autumn, Aidan threw himself into expansion plans for the foundation. Each new shelter, each program success story felt like a message to Mira. "I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm becoming someone worthy of you and our son." Then came the day that nearly broke him. He was visiting a diner near one of the Columbus shelters, a small place with worn booths and excellent coffee. As he studied the menu, a child's laugh made him look up. Through the window, he saw a woman walking past, holding the hand of a toddler who had to be about 3. The woman's dark hair was different, shorter, but something about her walk. Aidan was on his feet before he realized he was moving. By the time he reached the sidewalk, they had turned the corner. He followed at a distance, his heart thundering in his chest. The child stumbled, and the woman scooped him up with practiced ease. When she turned slightly to adjust her hold, Aidan caught a glimpse of her profile. It wasn't Mira. He stood there on the sidewalk, watching the woman and child disappear into the crowd, feeling both relieved and devastated. Somewhere, Mira was doing that same dance with their son, catching him when he fell, teaching him to walk, hearing his first words. Every milestone Aidan was missing felt like a physical pain. Back in his hotel room that night, he took out the last photo he had of Mira, the blurry security camera image from the bus station. "I saw a little boy today," he told her image softly. "He laughed just like I imagine our son laughs. Is Noah walking yet? Talking? Does he ask about me? Do you tell him anything about his father?" The questions echoed in the empty room, unanswered. On his laptop, reports from the foundation showed another successful month. Women housed, children protected, lives rebuilt. One report caught his eye. A mother and son, recently placed in their Cleveland shelter, the boy's age matching what Noah's would be. Aiden's finger hovered over the file. One click, and he'd know if it was them. Instead, he closed the laptop. If Mira was using their resources, she needed to feel safe doing so. His need to know couldn't override her need for independence. He picked up his phone, dialing Clara's number. "The art therapy program," he said when she answered. "Let's expand it. Full scholarships for women who want to pursue art education. And—" he took a deep breath. "And I want to donate Mira's old art supplies from storage. She'd want them to be used to help other artists find their voice again." "You're letting go," Clara observed quietly. "Not of hope," Aiden corrected. "Never of hope, but of control. Of the need to find her before she's ready to be found." He looked out his hotel window at the city lights, wondering if somewhere out there, Mira was looking at the same stars. "I'm learning that love means trusting her to find her way back if she's ready." That night he dreamed of a little boy with his eyes and Mira's smile, painting with tiny hands, creating art, just like his mother. In the dream, Mira watched them both, her expression soft with an emotion he dared not name. When he woke, his pillow was wet with tears, but his heart felt lighter. The Foundation's quarterly report arrived the next morning. Among the statistics and success stories was a small note. Elizabeth C. and infant son successfully placed in independent housing. Mother enrolled in art therapy program. Aiden read the line 100 times, memorizing each word. Then he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He closed the file without searching for more details. Instead, he began drafting plans for an on-site childcare center at the Columbus shelter, complete with an art room full of supplies for little hands learning to create. "Find your way back to me," he whispered to the morning light. "But first, find yourself, both of you." The city woke around him. Another day beginning. Another chance to prove that love could transform even the most ambitious heart into something softer, something worthy of the second chance he prayed would come. Chapter 8. Small Victories. "Mommy, look! I draw Daddy." Mira's heart stopped as Noah held up his crayon drawing, a tall figure in what appeared to be a business suit, standing next to a smaller figure with wild, dark hair. At 3 years old, Noah had suddenly become obsessed with family drawings, and each one felt like a small knife in her heart. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she managed, taking the picture with trembling hands. "But how do you know what Daddy looks like?" Noah pointed to the TV in their small apartment's living room, where CNBC was playing silently. There was Aiden, speaking at the opening of another women's shelter. Even with the sound off, Mira could see how he'd changed, the gentler set of his shoulders, the warmth in his eyes that had been missing in his corporate days. "That's the nice man who helps mommies," Noah said confidently. "He looks like me. Same eyes." Mira sank onto their worn couch, pulling Noah into her lap. He snuggled against her, smelling of crayons and the cookie he'd had at daycare. "You're very observant, my love," she whispered into his hair. The art therapy program at the New Beginnings Foundation had been a lifeline for both of them. Noah attended their children's art classes, while Mira worked on rebuilding her portfolio. She'd even sold a few pieces through their gallery program, though she signed them with her alias, Elizabeth Chen. Their apartment, subsidized through the Foundation's housing program, was small but filled with light, perfect for painting. Noah's artwork covered one wall, a rainbow explosion of creativity. Lately, his drawings had featured more and more father figures, as if his young mind was trying to fill in the blank spaces in his life. Ms. Clara says all families are different, Noah continued, playing with the pendant around Mira's neck, her wedding ring strung on a chain she never removed. Some kids have two mommies, some have two daddies, some just have mommies like me. Mira's eyes filled with tears. Clara Martinez, the foundation's director, had become a sort of guardian angel to them. Though Mira was careful never to meet her in person, everything was handled through intermediaries, protecting her privacy while providing the support they needed. "That's right, baby. All families are different." She hugged him tighter, breathing in his familiar scent. "And you know what? You have lots of people who love you. Aunt Janet, Mrs. Chen, your friends at daycare. But no daddy," Noah said thoughtfully. "Did my daddy go to heaven like Tommy's daddy?" The innocent question felt like a punch to the gut. "No, sweetheart, your daddy is very much alive. He's just—" She struggled to find words a 3-year-old could understand. "He's on a different path right now." Noah seemed to accept this, turning back to his crayons. But Mira remained frozen, staring at the TV where Aiden was now cutting a ribbon at the shelter opening. The crawler at the bottom of the screen announced another expansion of the Foundation's programs, this time focusing on art education for children of single mothers. Everything he did seemed designed to reach her, to show her he'd changed. The art programs, the childcare centers, the emphasis on independence and healing. It was as if he'd taken every criticism she'd ever made of him and turned it into action. Later that night, after Noah was asleep in his race car bed, a gift from the Foundation's children's program, Mira sat at her easel. She'd been working on a series of paintings about motherhood, each one telling part of their story without revealing too much. The current piece showed a woman and child looking at their reflection in a window, while through the glass a shadowy figure reached toward them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Saw the Foundation's new art scholarship announcement. You should apply. It's time, honey." Mira stared at the message, her heart racing. The scholarship would mean working directly with the Foundation's main office in Cleveland. The chance of running into Aiden would be significant. But the opportunity to finally pursue her art degree, to give Noah a more stable future. She looked at her son's latest drawing, still propped on the coffee table. The figure of Daddy had been drawn with careful attention to detail. Blue eyes, dark hair, even a tie that Noah had colored the exact shade of burgundy Aiden wore in his TV appearance. "He's looking for us, you know," Janet had told her last week over coffee. "Not actively searching anymore, but creating safe spaces everywhere he goes. The man's built an entire network of support systems, just waiting for you to use them." Mira walked to Noah's room, watching him sleep. In the dim glow of his nightlight, his resemblance to Aiden was striking. The same determined set of his jaw, the same long eyelashes resting against his cheeks. She thought of all the milestones Aiden had missed. Noah's first steps, taken in the diner's back office. His first words, "Mama," and surprisingly paint. His first day of daycare, where he'd immediately set up at the art table. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Janet. "He's not the same man you left. Maybe it's time to let him be the father Noah deserves." Mira touched the ring hanging around her neck. The metal was warm from being constantly worn, a reminder of promises made and broken, and perhaps promises that could be renewed. On her easel, the painting waited. Mother, child, and the reaching figure beyond the glass. Without thinking too hard about it, Mira picked up her brush. The shadowy figure began to take shape, becoming clearer, more defined. Blue eyes emerged from the darkness, kind and hopeful, looking not at the woman and child, but beyond them, toward a future that might still be possible. Noah stirred in his sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "Daddy." Mira's heart clenched. Her son was creating a father from glimpses on television and his own imagination. Was it fair to let him live with a fantasy when the reality, a changed, growing, loving reality, was out there building shelters and healing hearts. She returned to the living room and opened her laptop. The Foundation's scholarship application glowed on the screen. At the top was a quote, "Every journey begins with a single step toward healing." Below it was Aidan's signature, not as CEO or businessman, but simply as a fellow traveler on the path to becoming better. Mira's fingers hovered over the keyboard. 3 years of running, of hiding, of watching Aidan transform from afar. 3 years of Noah growing up without his father, drawing pictures of a man he'd only seen on TV. "Maybe," she whispered to the quiet apartment, "it's time for all of us to heal." She began to type, her heart pounding with each word. Under name, she paused, then slowly entered. Elizabeth Chen, Mira Donovan. It was a small step, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around their lives. But as she looked at Noah's drawing one last time before hitting submit, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. The night deepened around their small apartment, wrapping mother and child in its quiet embrace. Somewhere in Cleveland, Aidan was probably still working, still building safe spaces, still waiting. And for the first time since she'd left, Mira let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all finally ready to find their way back to each other. Chapter 9. Breaking Point. Aidan sat in his Cleveland office, staring at the scholarship application that had appeared on his desk. The name jumped off the page: Elizabeth Chen, Mira Donovan. His hands trembled as he read it again, hardly daring to believe. After 3 years of waiting, of building, of becoming someone new, she had reached out. "I think you should sit down for this too," Clara said from the doorway, holding another file. Noah's art class submission for the Foundation's children's exhibition just arrived. The drawing was simple but powerful, a family portrait. A tall man in a suit, a woman with dark hair holding paintbrushes, and a small boy between them. At the bottom, in careful child's writing, "My Family" by Noah Chen, age 3. "He's been watching you on TV," Clara explained gently. "He told his art teacher that the man who helps mommies has eyes just like his." Aidan pressed his hand to his mouth, tears spilling freely. His son, their beautiful artistic son, had found him without even knowing it, had been drawing him, watching him, creating a father from glimpses on television and his own heart's wishes. Across town, at that very moment, Mira was facing her own breaking point. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Noah asked, finding her at her easel, tears falling onto her latest painting. The canvas showed a man teaching a small boy to play piano while a woman watched from the doorway. It was a scene from her imagination, what might have been, what could still be. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're thinking about love," Mira explained, pulling him close. "Noah, sweetheart, what if I told you that the man you saw on TV, the one who helps mommies, what if I told you he's more than just someone who looks like you?" Noah's blue eyes, Aidan's eyes, widened. "Is he my daddy? For real?" The hope in his voice broke something in Mira's chest. Before she could answer, her phone rang. Clara Martinez's number. She had known this call would come when she submitted the application, had been both dreading and longing for it. "Mira," Clara said warmly, using her real name for the first time, "I think it's time we met in person, all of us." The word "us" hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mira looked at Noah, who was adding to his family drawing, carefully coloring his father's tie, the exact shade of burgundy he'd seen on TV. Is Aidan ready?" Mira whispered, one hand clutching her wedding ring pendant. "Are any of us ever really ready for healing?" Clara asked gently. "But he's done the work, Mira. 3 years of transforming not just himself, but creating spaces for others to transform too. And from your application, from Noah's art, it seems you've both been on parallel journeys of growth. Mira watched as Noah added a final touch to his drawing, a piano in the background, as if he somehow knew about the instrument that had once been the heart of their home. The scholarship interview is next week, Clara continued. But this isn't just about art school, is it? This is about three hearts that have been beating in separate rhythms, maybe finally ready to find their harmony again. In his office, Aidan was still holding Noah's drawing when Thomas arrived for their weekly meeting. One look at his friend's tear-stained face told him everything. "She's reached out, hasn't she?" Thomas asked quietly. Aidan nodded, unable to speak. He pointed to the scholarship application, then to the drawing. Thomas studied them both, a smile spreading across his face. "He has your eyes," Thomas observed, "and her talent." "I've missed everything," Aidan said hoarsely. "His first steps, first words, first drawings. I've been building all these shelters, all these programs, trying to prove I've changed, and my own son only knows me from television." "But he does know you," Thomas pointed out. "Look at this drawing. He's created a whole family in his heart, with you right at the center of it. Children have wisdom we sometimes forget. They know how to hope without fear." Aidan stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, his wife and son were living lives that paralleled his but never intersected. Until now. "What if I'm not ready?" he whispered. "What if I've changed, but not enough? What if—" "Stop," Thomas interrupted firmly. The man who drove Mira away would never ask those questions. He was too certain, too controlled, too afraid of vulnerability. This doubt you're feeling, this is what makes you ready. Back in their apartment, Mira was packing a small overnight bag while Noah napped. The scholarship interview was in Cleveland, a 3-hour drive that would change everything. Janet and Mrs. Chen had both offered to come with her for support, but she knew this journey was one she and Noah needed to make alone. She paused at her easel, looking at the unfinished painting of the piano lesson. Without conscious thought, she picked up her brush, adding final touches to the man's face. The gentler lines she'd seen in recent photos, the warmth that had replaced his old corporate mask. Noah woke from his nap, clutching his family drawing. "Can I bring this?" "For Daddy?" The simple question, full of such trust and hope, brought fresh tears to Mira's eyes. "Yes, my love. I think Daddy would love to have this." "Will he play piano with me? Like in your painting?" Mira thought of the grand piano in their old penthouse, of Aidan's fingers dancing across the keys while she painted. "I think he'd love that more than anything in the world." As they prepared for their journey, Aidan was making his own preparations. The scholarship interview was scheduled for Tuesday morning, but he'd asked Clara to arrange something more private first. "The children's art room at the shelter," he suggested. "Neutral ground, somewhere Noah would feel comfortable. And the piano. Have them move the piano in there." Clara smiled knowingly. Already done. And Aidan, remember to breathe. The weekend stretched before them all. Mira and Noah in their small apartment filled with art and love. Aidan in his too large house filled with plans and hopes. Three hearts beating in separate places, moving slowly but surely toward their breaking point. Or perhaps, Clara thought as she made the final arrangements, it wasn't a breaking point at all. Maybe it was a healing point where broken pieces could finally begin to mend. In his room, Noah carefully packed his crayons and extra paper. "For drawing with Daddy," he explained to his stuffed bear. In her studio, Mira wrapped the unfinished piano lesson painting, and in his office, Aidan sat at his desk, writing a letter he hoped would bridge 3 years of silence. The city moved around them, unaware that lives were about to change, that hearts were about to collide, that a family drawn in crayon was about to have a chance at becoming real. Chapter 10. The trail. Clara Martinez stood in the Foundation's art gallery, surrounded by children's drawings submitted for the upcoming exhibition. She'd arranged them carefully. Noah's family portrait would be the centerpiece, though it wasn't here yet. That drawing, along with its young artist and his mother, was currently making its way toward Cleveland in a blue Honda Civic that Clara's team was discreetly tracking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Janet at the diner. They just left. Mira's terrified but determined. Noah's packed enough art supplies for a small army. Another buzz. Mrs. Chen this time. Gave them dumplings for the road. Boy keeps practicing saying daddy under his breath. Clara smiled, touching her earpiece. They're on their way. Is everything ready? The piano's been moved to the children's art room, her assistant confirmed. Fresh art supplies, comfortable seating, security in place but invisible. Mr. Donovan is... well, he's trying to work but mostly staring out his office window. In his corner office overlooking the city, Aidan was indeed standing at the window, but his mind was 3 hours away on a highway where his wife and son were traveling toward him. The revelation of their location had come through a series of small details. The postmark on Noah's art submission, Janet's name on emergency contact forms, a utility bill for Elizabeth Chen that matched Mira's handwriting. You should go home. Get some rest, Thomas suggested from the doorway. Big day tomorrow. Aidan shook his head, not turning from the window. I can't. I keep thinking, what if they need help on the road? What if the car breaks down? What if you drive yourself crazy with what-ifs and are too exhausted to be present when they arrive? Thomas interrupted gently. Clara's team is watching over them. They'll be safe. On the highway, unaware of the protective network around them, Mira drove steadily northeast while Noah chattered in his car seat. He'd insisted on wearing his best shirt, a tiny button-down that matched the ones he'd seen Aidan wear on TV. Mummy, will Daddy like my drawing? Did you pack it Carefully, Mira corrected automatically, her teacher's instincts surfacing even through her anxiety. And yes, baby, it's safe in your special folder. I'm sure Daddy will love it. The word daddy still felt strange on her tongue after 3 years of careful avoidance. She touched her wedding ring pendant, a habit that had become more frequent as they got closer to Cleveland. Ms. Clara said Daddy has a special room just for art, Noah continued excitedly, with real paints and everything, and a piano, Mummy, just like in your painting. Mira's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Clara had been amazing throughout this process, preparing Noah with stories about his father that were both true and age-appropriate. Yes, Daddy helps people. Yes, Daddy loves art and music. Yes, Daddy has been waiting to meet you. The last part had made Mira cry when Clara first said it. The thought of Aidan waiting, growing, building safe spaces year after year, hoping they would find their way to him. It was so far from the driven CEO who'd thrown that whiskey glass in anger. Her phone's GPS chirped, announcing another hour of travel. In her rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of Noah holding his stuffed bear up to see out the window. Look, Mr. Bear, we're going to meet Daddy. He has eyes just like mine, and he plays piano, and he builds houses for mommies who need help, and... Noah's excited litany continued, each word simultaneously warming and breaking Mira's heart. Her son had built an entire relationship with his father through television glimpses and Clara's stories. Would the real Aidan live up to this child's beautiful expectations? Back in Cleveland, Clara was reviewing security footage of Aidan's latest shelter visit. She'd been watching his transformation for 3 years. But something about this particular video struck her. He was sitting at the piano in the children's center, playing softly while a little girl painted nearby. His expression was gentle, patient, completely present in the moment. Send this to Mira, Clara decided, typing out a message. She needs to see who he's become. Mira's phone buzzed at their next rest stop. While Noah had a bathroom break and snack, she watched the video, tears falling freely. The Aiden she'd left would have never had time for such a quiet moment, would have seen it as wasteful when there were deals to close. "Mommy, why are you crying again? Happy tears or sad tears?" Mira quickly wiped her eyes, pulling Noah close. "Happy tears, my love, very happy tears." As they got back on the road, Aiden was finally heading home, though home was no longer the penthouse. He'd bought a modest house with a garden, just as he'd planned 3 years ago. The piano from their old apartment sat in the living room, recently tuned. Noah's room, painted blue and ready for whenever he might be allowed to visit, held an easel sized for a child. "Everything's ready," Clara assured him over the phone. "The art room is stocked, security is in place, and Aiden, breathe." He realized he'd been holding his breath. What if he hates me, Clara? What if Mira takes one look at me and realizes I haven't changed enough? What if you trust the process? Clara interrupted gently. Trust that Mira wouldn't have reached out if she wasn't ready. Trust that Noah already loves you sight unseen. Trust yourself. Trust. It had always been his hardest lesson. Trust in love over control, in presence over possession, in the slow work of healing over quick fixes. As evening approached, Mira and Noah checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of Cleveland. Clara had offered to put them up somewhere nicer, but Mira needed this last night of their old life. Just her and Noah, simple and familiar. "Can we practice again?" Noah asked as she tucked him into bed. They'd been rehearsing what he would say to Aiden, though Clara had assured them no rehearsal was necessary. "One more time," Mira agreed, smoothing his dark hair, so like his father's. Noah sat up straight, clutching his bear. "Hello, Daddy, I'm Noah. I drew you a picture. Do you want to see?" The simplicity of it brought fresh tears to Mira's eyes. No anger over abandonment, no resentment for missed years, just pure childhood hope and love. "Perfect," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Now sleep, my love. Tomorrow's a big day." Once Noah was asleep, Mira sat by the hotel window, looking out at the Cleveland skyline. Somewhere out there, Aiden was probably doing the same. She touched her wedding ring pendant, remembering the day he'd placed it on her finger, full of promises and dreams. Her phone buzzed one last time. Clara again. "Everything's ready. The art room is perfect. Aiden's, well, he's as nervous as you are. Remember, you can set the pace. No pressure, no expectations, just 3 hearts finding their way back to each other." Mira looked at her sleeping son, then back at the city lights. They'd come so far, all of them. Aiden from ambitious CEO to compassionate builder of safe spaces. Herself from frightened runaway to strong single mother. Noah from newborn secret to bridge between 2 healing hearts. "Please," she whispered to the night sky, "let us be ready. Let this be right." In his house across the city, Aiden sat at the piano, playing softly in the dark. The lullaby he'd composed for Noah years ago, before he even knew his son existed, floated through the quiet rooms. Tomorrow, maybe, he would play it for its intended audience. The night wrapped around them all. Mother, father, child, each in their separate spaces, but moving steadily toward reunion. 3 hearts beating in rhythm with hope, fear, love, and the possibility of becoming whole again. Chapter 11. Closing in. Morning dawned clear and bright over Cleveland, the kind of autumn day that painted the city in shades of gold and promise. In her hotel room, Mira stood before the mirror, trying to steady her trembling hands as she fastened her necklace, her wedding ring still hanging from its chain, a weight both familiar and suddenly significant. "Mommy, is it time yet?" Noah bounced on the hotel bed, already dressed in his carefully chosen outfit. He clutched his folder of artwork in one hand and Mr. Bear in the other, too excited to eat the breakfast she'd ordered. "Soon, baby." Mira checked her phone. A message from Clara. "Art room is ready. Aiden's here early. practicing at the piano. Take your time. Everything's on your schedule. The Foundations building wasn't far from their hotel. Mira could see its modern facade from their window. She'd chosen this hotel deliberately, needing to be close enough to walk if her courage failed her while driving. Now, watching Noah vibrate with excitement, she wondered if any amount of physical distance could have prepared her for this moment. Across the city, in the Foundation's art room, Aidan sat at the piano, his fingers moving restlessly over the keys. He'd been there since dawn, unable to stay home, unable to work, unable to do anything but wait and remember and hope. "They're awake," Clara reported from the doorway. "Hotel says they ordered breakfast." Aidan nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd changed his tie 3 times this morning, finally settling on the burgundy one Noah seemed to favor in his drawings. The room around him was perfect. Easels set up with fresh paper, art supplies organized by color, the piano positioned so it didn't dominate but remained accessible. "What if?" he started. "No more what ifs," Clara interrupted gently. "They're here. They've chosen to come. That's all that matters now." Back in the hotel, Mira helped Noah pack his backpack for the 10th time. "Crayons? Check. Extra paper? Check. Mr. Bear?" Noah hugged his bear tight. "He's nervous, Mommy. But I told him Daddy will love him just like he loves us." The simple certainty in his voice brought tears to Mira's eyes. Children's hearts, she thought, were so much braver than adult ones. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "You've got this, honey. He's not the same man you left. Trust what you've seen." Another from Mrs. Chen. "Xiao Nanhai needs his father. And you need your heart back." Mira took a deep breath, checking her reflection one last time. She'd chosen to wear her hair down, the way Aidan had always loved it. Her artist's smock was clean but paint-stained, a statement of who she'd become in their time apart. "Ready, my love." Noah grabbed his backpack and folder, practically bouncing toward the door. "Ready? Can we go? Is it time? Will Daddy be there already?" "Yes, baby, Daddy's waiting for us." The walk to the Foundation building felt both endless and too short. Noah chattered the whole way, pointing out every detail that delighted him: a red leaf, a passing dog, a cloud that looked like a bear. Mira held his hand tightly, letting his innocent excitement ground her. In the art room, Aidan paced, unable to sit still any longer. Clara had brought him coffee, but it sat untouched on a side table. "Security says they've left the hotel," she reported. "Walking, not driving. 7 minutes, maybe less." Aidan's hands shook as he straightened pictures on the walls, children's artwork from their various programs. Among them were spaces reserved for Noah's submissions waiting to be hung. "Should I play when they arrive? Or would that be too much? Should I stand? Sit? Clara, I don't know how to do this." "Yes, you do," Clara assured him. "You've been learning how for 3 years. Just be present, be real, be the man you've become." In the lobby, Mira stopped to gather her courage. Noah tugged at her hand, pointing at a large painting on the wall, one of hers, she realized, sold through the Foundation's gallery program. "Look, Mommy, your painting. Does that mean Daddy kept it safe for us?" Before she could answer, Clara appeared, her warm smile immediately setting Mira at ease. "Welcome, both of you. Noah, I love your outfit. Very professional." Noah straightened proudly. "It's like Daddy's. Is he here? Did he bring the piano? Can I show him my drawings?" "He's here," Clara confirmed, crouching to Noah's level. "He's been practicing a special song just for you. Would you like to hear it?" Noah nodded enthusiastically, then suddenly turned shy, pressing against Mira's leg. The reality of the moment seemed to finally hit him. "Mommy," he whispered, "will you hold my hand?" "Always, my love." Clara led them toward the elevator, giving Mira an encouraging smile. 3rd floor. The art room has big windows, lots of light. You can take as long as you need." The elevator ride was silent, except for Noah's excited breathing and the rustle of his artwork folder. Mira's heart thundered in her chest, her wedding ring feeling heavier with each floor they passed. On the third floor, soft piano music drifted down the hallway. A lullaby Mira had never heard before, but somehow felt she knew. Noah's grip on her hand tightened. "That's for me," he said with complete certainty. "Daddy's playing for me." They followed the music, each step bringing them closer to the moment that would change everything. Through the art room's glass walls, Mira could see him, Aidan at the piano, his back to the door, shoulders tense with anticipation. Clara touched her arm gently. "I'll be right outside. Remember, this is your space, your time, no pressure, no expectations." Noah looked up at Mira, his blue eyes, Aidan's eyes, full of trust and love. "Ready, Mommy?" She touched her wedding ring pendant one last time, feeling the years of separation, growth, and hope contained in its circle of gold. "Ready, my love." Clara opened the door silently, the lullaby washing over them in gentle waves. Noah stood transfixed, watching his father's back as he played the song written just for him, though neither of them had known it then. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the art room floor. In that moment of suspended time, three hearts beat in perfect rhythm, father, mother, child, on the cusp of becoming whole again. Noah took a small step forward, his artwork clutched to his chest, Mr. Bear dangling from one hand. The movement must have caught Aidan's peripheral vision because his hands stilled on the keys. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then Noah, brave and beautiful in his tiny button-down shirt, spoke the words they'd practiced, but no longer needed. "Hello, Daddy. I drew you a picture. Do you want to see?" Chapter 12. Forever Found. "Hello, Daddy. I drew you a picture. Do you want to see?" Noah's innocent words hung in the air like a melody, and Aidan's world stopped turning. Slowly, barely breathing, he turned on the piano bench to face his son for the first time. The sight stole his breath completely. There stood Noah, tiny and perfect in his matching burgundy tie, clutching his artwork with hopeful eyes, Aidan's own eyes, shining with unconditional love. Behind him stood Mira, more beautiful than ever, tears already streaming down her face, one hand protectively on Noah's shoulder and the other touching the wedding ring that hung around her neck. "Noah," Aidan whispered, his voice breaking on that precious name. He slid off the bench to kneel at his son's level, hands trembling as he held them out. "Yes, I would love to see your picture." Noah took 2 small steps forward, then suddenly broke into a run, launching himself into his father's arms. The artwork scattered across the floor as Aidan caught him, holding him close for the first time in 3 years of waiting, hoping, and becoming worthy of this moment. "I knew you'd look just like your pictures on TV," Noah said into Aidan's shoulder, his small arms wrapped tight around his father's neck. "I knew you'd be real." Aidan couldn't speak through his tears, could only hold his son and breathe in the miracle of him, the soft warmth of his hair, the solid reality of his tiny body, the pure trust in his embrace. When he finally found his voice, it was to whisper, "I love you, Noah. I've loved you every second, even before I knew you existed." Noah pulled back just enough to look at his face, one small hand touching Aidan's tear-streaked cheek with wonder. "Don't cry, Daddy. Look, I brought lots of pictures, and Mr. Bear came too, and Mommy's here. Mommy, come see. Daddy's crying happy tears like you do." Mira hadn't moved from her spot by the door, overwhelmed by the sight of father and son together at last. But at Noah's call, she took a shaky step forward. Aidan looked up at her, still holding Noah close, his eyes full of 3 years' worth of love, regret, and hope. "Mira," he breathed. And in that one word was every apology, every promise, every change he'd made to become the man she'd always believed he could be. She crossed the space between them slowly, kneeling beside them on the art room floor. Noah immediately wrapped one arm around her too, creating a circle of family that had waited so long to be complete. "You changed everything," Mira whispered, finally allowing herself to look directly into Aiden's eyes. "The shelters, the programs, the art classes. You built a whole world of healing." "I built it for you," Aiden said softly. "Both of you. Every brick, every program, every piano lesson. It was all just me learning how to love without needing to control. Learning how to be worthy of you coming home." Noah wiggled happily between them, completely secure in the love surrounding him. "Daddy, want to see my drawings now? I made lots and lots. This one is our family, see? And this one is you playing piano, and this one is—" As Noah spread his artwork on the floor around them, Aiden kept one arm around him while reaching for Mira's hand with the other. When their fingers touched, the spark was still there, not just of attraction, but of understanding, of shared growth, of love that had matured through separation into something stronger. "The lullaby," Mira said, squeezing his hand, "the one you were playing when we arrived." "I wrote it for him," Aiden explained, watching as Noah arranged his pictures just so. "After I found out about him, I played it every night, hoping somehow the music would find its way to him. It did." Mira smiled through her tears. "He's been humming it all morning, even though he'd never heard it before." Noah looked up from his artwork display. "Can you play it again, Daddy? And then can you teach me? Mummy says you're the best piano teacher ever." "I would love that more than anything," Aiden said, pressing a kiss to his son's dark hair. "But first, I think Mr. Bear needs to hear all about these beautiful drawings." As Noah launched into a detailed explanation of each picture, Aiden and Mira sat together on the floor, their shoulders touching, their hands still linked. Outside the art room windows, Cleveland continued its daily rhythm, unaware that inside this sunlit space, 3 hearts were finally beating as one. "I'm so sorry," Aiden whispered, low enough for only Mira to hear. "For everything before, for the man I was." Mira touched the ring hanging from her neck. That man helped create this perfect little boy. He just needed to learn how to love without fear. She unclasped the necklace, sliding the ring off its chain. "The question is, has the new man learned that lesson?" Aiden watched as Noah demonstrated his crayon technique on a fresh piece of paper, his small face serious with concentration. "I learn it new every day," he said honestly. "Every shelter we open, every family we help, every piece of art we display. It's all part of the lesson that love isn't about possession. It's about appreciation," Mira finished, remembering the words she'd written on that sketch so long ago. She held out the ring. "Then maybe it's time for this to come home too." Aiden's hands trembled as he took the ring, but before he could speak, Noah looked up from his drawing. "Is that your pretty ring, Mommy? The one you said was better than all the stars?" "Yes, my love," Mira smiled. "It's my wedding ring. Would you like to help Daddy put it back where it belongs?" Noah's eyes lit up. "Yes. Is it like in my drawing? The one where we're all together forever?" "Exactly like that," Aiden said, his voice thick with emotion. He held out the ring, and Noah solemnly helped guide it onto Mira's finger, just as he'd drawn it in his picture of their future. The morning sun caught the diamond, sending tiny rainbows dancing across Noah's artwork. He clapped in delight, then suddenly remembered something important. "Daddy, you haven't met Mr. Bear properly yet, and he needs to hear your special song again, and I want to show you my art corner at home and my race car bed, and—" "We have time," Mira assured him, leaning into Aiden's embrace. "We have all the time in the world now." Aiden lifted Noah onto the piano bench between them. his heart fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. As he began to play the lullaby again, Noah's small hands reached out to touch the keys, while Mira's fingers found their old familiar place on his shoulder. Outside the art room, Clara quietly closed the door, tears in her own eyes as she watched the family finally whole. On the floor around the piano, Noah's artwork told their story, past, present and future, drawn in crayon and love. But the most beautiful picture was the one being created in this moment. Father, mother and child together at last. Their love stronger for having been tested, their bonds deeper for having been broken and reforged. And as the lullaby filled the sunlit room, three hearts that had once beaten in separate rhythms finally found their perfect harmony. Subscribe if liked.